You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have back on the Goldstein on Gelt show Bob Arno. Bob spoke to us before, and in fact, if you missed the interview, you should be sure to download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com to hear what Bob said last time. Bob is perhaps one of the world's most famous pickpockets, but he's not spending time in jail. Rather, he spends his time teaching law enforcement and other people how to avoid being the victim of this kind of crime, as well as many, many other crimes. Bob, it's a pleasure to have you back.
Hello there. Thank you very much.
So last time, one of the things I wanted to start with, but I just got so excited talking about the work you were doing, is what's your background? How did you get to be who you are today?
That's a good question. It's a long journey, I can tell you that much, because nothing comes easy in terms of understanding how con men thinks. But I think it started out with an enormous curiosity for scams and cons already as a teenager. I was brought up in Sweden, and my father was a judge. And what I was especially impressed by my father during the dinner conversation was his way to use pattern recognition, how he would simplify for us and explain 2-3 different patterns, how it led to a conclusion. And as a teenager, seeing this in actual fact, I remember distinctly, for example, how when I was a teenager, someone stole my umbrella from my classroom. I was maybe 14, 15 years old. And in 2 days, he managed to get it back by simply going to the class and looking at some of the students and who was sitting beside me, asking a couple of questions, and then watching someone. And he got the darn umbrella back, and I just couldn't fathom how impressed I was. But in any case, I then started with a tremendous interest collecting articles and about con men and scammers. And in the early 60s, I worked as a photographer journalist out in Asia. And in Vietnam, we would see various forms of cons that happened to these young American GIs when they went on R&R, the recreational leave, to the cities around. So places like Taipei and Bangkok and Singapore and Hong Kong would be the cities where these young, shall we say, inexperienced Midwestern Americans would go in for 10 days, and they were often ripped off. And I'm not talking about now that they were hit over the head, but cute scams. They could be shortchanging or fake jewelry or pickpocketing or the free card monte. So my stories was picked up by the newspaper in those years called Stars and Stripes. And it led to that the military police suggested that I did a tour in Vietnam trying to show my pickpocket show as well as explaining how these things happen. And from there on, it was a snowball effect, meaning it never stopped, and I got deeper and deeper in it.
So you were never on the wrong side of the law?
No, the only time where you could say that it got close is when some law enforcement agencies around the world asked me to put together a team of 2 or 3 pickpockets in order to accomplish something on their behalf. Mm-hmm. But never anything where I would have to serve any time in jail.
It's interesting what you said. You touched on this concept of pattern recognition, which is a topic which has actually come up on this show many times. In fact, I think the first time it came up, I was talking to world chess champion Susan Polgar, originally from Hungary. And so she was talking. Subsequently, I've spoken to her a number of times about this topic. She was talking about how when she plays chess, she doesn't look at any individual move, but rather she looks at the whole board and sees certain patterns. And in fact, there was a Nobel Prize won on this topic where the theory of what they called chunking, where a person would look at something in chunks, in big picture, in big pieces, and that's what the experts seemed to determine was the sign of a real expert, meaning that he could look at many details as one big picture so he could do much greater analysis the way a chess player would do. He looks at the whole board instead of saying, when you play against Susan Polgar, she doesn't say, well, if I go here, Bob will go there, and then I'll go here, and I'll go here. She's not thinking that. She's seeing the whole game kind of in one fell swoop. So it's interesting that also in your field, pattern recognition is so important.
Well, this is what I actually teach to law enforcement, and I couple it with body language profiling and microexpression. So when you take a combination of microexpressions in the face and pattern recognition, where a certain behavior repeats itself, and it doesn't fall within the rest of the pattern recognition. Meaning, if you take a hotel lobby and you say you see 50 people moving about, a few are up checking in, 2 people stand with their bags to wait for a taxi, 3 people are coming out of a restaurant, and so forth. Well, the pace and the speed and the behavior of those 50 people will fall within a certain pattern that repeats itself for the same type of individuals when they have a motive of checking in or checking out. But the people who are in there to scam or to steal, to watch for security, to watch for the opportunity of how they can steal that handbag or purse or whatever, they are going to attempt to look natural and relaxed so that the hotel security does not pick them up. But trying to look natural and trying to be relaxed is not the same as succeeding, and so they are going to fail, and that is where the security teaching comes in.
Interesting. We are talking to Bob Arno. Bob was previously on the Goldstein on Gelt show. If you missed the original interview, you can download the podcast at goldsteinongelt.com. Bob is an expert in all sorts of things related to originally pickpocketing, but now much larger issues of theft, and he deals and consults with people on risk management and how to deal with specific risks to themselves. Bob, a lot of times businessmen are traveling and they're so busy and focused on what they're doing, which is their job, that they don't necessarily have time to wonder, am I about to get pickpocketed? But surely they should be wondering. What would you suggest?
Well, I think that it is not necessarily just an issue of your passport and your credit cards and your cash, but it certainly is also about that laptop, about the hard drive, and about the iPad. And of course, someone who is coming in for 3 days, whether it's Singapore or Shanghai or Johannesburg to strike up some new business, they, of course, have been told from their home office, be very careful about your computer. But yet, quite often you can let your guard down. Let's give such a simple scenario as a breakfast period, let's say at 8:30 in the morning. Well, while you're in there, you have your attaché case with you. You're getting your breakfast, and the attaché case is on the floor between your legs or on a chair right beside you. Now, the bad guys are going to come in, and they're going to be 3 or 4 of them, and they are going to position themselves. They will have, for example, one controller who with fingers will indicate to the rest of his team members how to approach or make the next move. And what the controller does is he watches the stuff, how observant they are, looking at everyone, whether security have taught the service personnel to look out for thieves, or whether they're just absent-minded, bringing pots of tea and things like that back and forth. They're also going to watch the cameras and see how the angle of what the camera can pick up. And what they're hoping for are individuals who are sitting in a line where either the cameras or the staff are not observant. They may then position themselves nearby. They may have what we call a fanny pack, a little small case or leather pouch that they wear in front of them. And inside there will be a small jacket that has been folded up. And as soon as they see a bag, an attaché case that is not handheld, that sits maybe a foot away from the owner, one of the bad guys will move up, take his little jacket out, drape it over his shoulder, and stand very close to the bag that they want to lift. A third member will create a commotion or the distraction, which could simply be dropping a little bit of cereal on the floor, tipping over an orange juice, taking a newspaper in a foreign language and move it over to the man and say something like, I've already finished this one, would you like International Herald Tribune? Any little thing that appears to be natural but is enough that for 2 seconds draws the attention away from the owner of that. We call these guys breakfast thieves, and they are common all across Europe.
Wow. Wow. Okay. What about the people who, instead of bringing a laptop that's filled with information, simply use a remote desktop login so that there's actually no data on the laptop itself? It just allows them to log into their office so that were it stolen, they could just call the office and say, hey, change my password.
Well, this, of course, is extremely common, cloud computing and intranet, of course, and an intranet is far harder to break into. But at the same time, if they really are sophisticated, and this is very rare, but take something like a jewelry salesman where the thieves are superbly aggressive in order to get to. To give you an example, let's assume that the jewelry salesman has $1 million worth of diamonds in a bag. The bad guys will come in advance to that city, and they know that this particular individual rents car A or B, and by that I mean a certain brand, by having observed him the year before at the same jewelry show, whether it was in Las Vegas or in Hong Kong, where those annual trade shows for jewelry is. They will rent 10 cars of the same type from that company where he usually goes, simply to get a copy of the trunk key. And now when the man with the important bag rents that car, they will follow him, create a blocking or a stop at the red light, and simply pop the trunk up for 2 seconds with the key that they already have. Now that takes a tremendous amount of planning to go to that extent. And the point that I'm coming to here is that a businessman who is using an intranet, a secure site that they go to with cloud computing, there could conceivably be a pinhole camera placed in that hotel room that reads the keys of the security going in. But this is extremely rare, what I'm defining now, and it's only in exceptional cases where the stakes are very high.
Wow. So what's going on in the head of these bad guys? Are they sociopaths or are they just opportunists?
No, on the contrary. The sociopaths are the lower end, the muggers, and some of the career criminals who simply have such a poor upbringing that they tend to fall into the pattern of sociopaths. The good con men, in no way, they have a certain rush factor. They feel that they are superior to the rest of society, and they like what they do. They can be very charming. If you sit with them and have dinner, you would find them, you will never forget that encounter, because they are so charming and so rich of information. In no way could you call them low-end criminals, but the planning is cautious and careful, and they take it to an extreme. Do they always succeed? No, of course not. 9 times out of 10 they may fail, but they have enough of a success rate over a week or over a month to make it well worth what they're doing.
When you say fail, you don't mean get arrested. They just don't get far.
No, they just it doesn't unravel the way they had planned for. They may brush up to the individual, and he pulls aside and he senses that something is wrong. Or if they're doing shoulder surfing for the PIN number of the credit card, for example, they miss the 4th digit. There something or another goes wrong, and they don't succeed in what they had hoped for.
Okay. We've been talking to Bob Arno. It's the second time we've had him on the Goldstein on Gelt show. If you missed the first interview, be sure to download the podcast at goldsteinongelt.com. Bob, in the last few seconds, could you just tell people how can they learn more about what you're doing?
I think if they are particularly interested in cons and scams, they can by all means go to our website on security, which is simply thiefhunters.com, and thief hunters in plural, not thief hunter. And if they like the show side, meaning if they want to giggle and laugh and so forth, we do have the fun part where we perform around the world for large corporations, and that is at Bob Arno in one word, bobarno.com. So we have the two profiles, the fun one and the serious one.
Okay, Bob Arno, thanks so much for joining us again.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt show.